Eliza Fairrow had been engaged for 3 years, and in all that time her fiancé had never once taken her hand unless propriety demanded it. Not in private, not in comfort, not even absent-mindedly. Philip Hardwick liked order. He liked appearances. He liked the way things reflected upon him. Eliza, he often said, suited his life very well. She listened. She did not embarrass him. She wore the colors he preferred and arranged her hair in the manner he found most becoming. When she altered either, he noticed at once. "You'll draw too much attention," he would say mildly, adjusting his cuff before the looking-glass. Or, "That style makes you look uncertain." He always said these things while watching himself. Eliza would change it. It was easier. And easier, she had learned, was often mistaken for harmony. People called it a long engagement. Eliza called it patience. She told herself affection took many forms, and that quiet men expressed devotion differently. Safety, after all, was no small thing. She was not unaware of the bargain she was making. Patience was a choice, one she renewed deliberately, day by day. Philip mistook that choice for permanence. Eliza did not trouble herself to correct him. Still, there were moments, usually late at night, when the question crept in despite her best efforts. Is this what my life will be like? It was often after those moments that Philip became unexpectedly attentive. He would remark upon her steadiness, praise her discretion, speak with sudden warmth of the future they were building. Together, he would say, as though the word itself were reassurance enough. He spoke of her as essential, irreplaceable, of how fortunate he was to have found someone so well suited to him. Eliza always felt faintly foolish afterward for having doubted him at all. Not because the question had been wrong, but because she had allowed herself to expect the answer to change. That, she told herself, was what love looked like in quiet men. It did not announce itself. It did not demand. It settled. And yet, even settlements could fracture if enough pressure was applied in the same place, for long enough. She did not dwell further on the question. Eliza had never been one to dramatize her own unhappiness. If something could not be solved, she observed it, noted its shape, its pattern. That, too, had always been considered a virtue. The invitation to the Langley Winter Assembly arrived on a Thursday. Philip accepted on her behalf before she had finished reading it. "It will be expected," he said, already reaching for his gloves. "Everyone of note will be there." He did not ask if she wished to attend. He never did. Eliza nodded. Of course they would. It was only later, when her aunt mentioned it casually over tea, that Eliza heard the other name spoken. "The Duke of Winslow has returned," her aunt said. "Do you remember Calder?" Eliza's spoon paused midway to her lips. She remembered him. Calder Winslow had been a thorn in her flesh since childhood. Loud where others were cautious. Reckless where the tongue preferred restraint. He had never followed rules, and worse, he had never seemed to suffer for it. He had pulled her hair when they were young, teased her until she cried. Once, unforgivably, he had cut a small braid from her hair and laughed as she fled the room. That had been the last straw. Eliza had decided then and there that she did not like him. As they grew older, nothing about him softened. He rode too fast, spoke too plainly, lived as though consequence were a rumor meant for other people. She had not seen him in years, and yet, when she stepped into the ballroom that evening, Philip several paces ahead of her, already scanning the room, Eliza felt it before she saw him. Philip did not slow his pace. He never noticed when she lagged behind, navigating crowded rooms alone. Calder Winslow stood near the edge of the floor, hands clasped behind his back, no urgency in his posture at all. He looked exactly as he always had, too composed for someone with his reputation, too observant for someone meant to be careless. Their eyes met. He inclined his head. Nothing more. Eliza felt an odd tightening in her chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. She disliked surprises, especially the kind that suggested she had missed something. She looked away at once, annoyed with herself. Old memories had a way of misbehaving. Philip did not notice. He rarely noticed anything that was not directed at him. But Calder Winslow did not look away, and for reasons Eliza could not yet fully articulate, only register, she had the sudden, unsettling thought that someone at last was paying attention. Philip arrived precisely on time. Eliza was fastening her gloves when he entered, already smoothing his cuffs, already angling himself toward the mirror near the door. He did not look at her at once. "You're wearing the blue," he said with a nod of approval. "That's sensible." She finished adjusting the second glove before answering. The calm of the small ritual steadied her. "Philip," she said evenly, "may I ask you something?" He paused, then inclined his head without turning away from his reflection. "If it's quick." She stepped closer, close enough that he could not pretend not to hear her. "Do you love me?" The question landed cleanly. No tremor, no accusation, no plea. Philip turned at last, clearly startled. Not by emotion, but by the directness of it. "Love?" he repeated, as though tasting the word. "Yes," he exhaled softly, faintly amused. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being clear." He studied her then, his expression thoughtful in the way he reserved for matters that concerned him alone. Eliza recognized that look. It was the look of assessment, not consideration. "No," he said at last. "I don't believe I do." Eliza nodded once. She had expected the answer. Hearing it aloud did not wound her. It settled something that had been hovering, unresolved, for far too long. "Then why?" she asked quietly. "Are you engaged to marry me?" Philip frowned as though she had misunderstood something obvious. "Because we suit," he said. "Because you are steady. Because you reflect well on me. Because marriage is an arrangement, not an indulgence." He spoke easily, confidently, as though he were explaining a principle rather than a choice. Eliza watched his face as he spoke, searching for something she had once believed must be there. Doubt, discomfort, even the faintest regret. There was none. "Love complicates things," he continued, already reaching for his gloves again. "What we have is far more reliable." She drew a slow breath. "I see." Philip moved past her without hesitation, opening the door and stepping into the corridor, his mind already elsewhere. "We're expected," he said over his shoulder. "There's no need to linger." Eliza followed him out. He walked several paces ahead, as he always did, never once looking back. His attention had already shifted outward, to the evening, to the audience waiting beyond the doors, to the impression he intended to make. She did not hurry to keep pace. As the door closed behind them, Eliza felt no urge to cry, no flare of anger, no disbelief, only relief, quiet, unmistakable, and steady. She had asked the question that mattered, and she had received the only answer Philip Hardwick was capable of giving. By the time she entered the ballroom, the engagement was already over. The ring simply had not yet been returned. Eliza had attended enough assemblies to know how to behave in them. She stood where Philip placed her. She smiled when spoken to. She listened when required. It was a familiar choreography, one she performed well. Years of practice had made it effortless. What unsettled her was the sensation of being noticed, not politely, not socially, but deliberately. The Langley Assembly glittered as such rooms always did. Light fractured by glass and brass, music drifting just loudly enough to prevent intimacy. The air hummed with conversation and expectation. Philip moved ahead of her, greeting acquaintances, already engaged in exchanges that required her presence but not her participation. Eliza remained half a step behind, as she always did. She was accustomed to this position. It had once seemed unremarkable. Now, with the clarity Part 2 had granted her, it felt unmistakably deliberate. It was then she became aware of Calder Winslow again. He had not approached her. He had not announced himself. He had simply appeared nearer than before, as though the room itself had rearranged subtly around him. He spoke to no one. His attention was not divided. He did not scan the room in search of admiration or acknowledgement. He was watching her. Eliza adjusted her gloves, irritated with herself for noticing. It meant nothing. Old familiarity had a way of misleading the senses. She reminded herself firmly that Calder Winslow had always been an inconvenience, nothing more. Yet when Philip paused beside a cluster of gentlemen and launched into a discussion that clearly did not include her, Eliza felt the weight of that gaze again. Steady, unhurried. She stood alone while Philip spoke. She waited. She looked up. Calder Winslow did not look away. There was no smile, no challenge, no trace of the boy who had once tormented her. Only a composed, assessing stillness that made her feel suddenly and uncomfortably present, as though she were not fading politely into the background. Her heart gave an unhelpful little thud. Philip gestured vaguely in her direction, then introducing her without quite turning his head. "My fiancée," he said before continuing his point. Eliza inclined her head. The gentlemen acknowledged her politely. One of them smiled. Another murmured something agreeable. Philip did not pause to ensure she was included. He did not reposition himself, so she stood beside him. He did not offer his arm when the conversation shifted and the group moved. He simply stepped forward. Eliza followed, once again navigating the space left behind him. The orchestra adjusted their tempo. Chairs scraped lightly across the floor. The subtle anticipation of a new set rippled through the room. Eliza felt it then, that particular moment when a dance was about to be claimed. She did not yet know by whom. Philip remained where he was, already engaged again, his body angled outward, his attention elsewhere. He did not glance at her. He did not ask. She waited, longer than was comfortable, and then understood. He would not. Around them, couples began to pair off. Gentlemen extended arms. Ladies smiled. The floor filled with movement. Eliza remained still. She was aware then, acutely, of how conspicuous stillness could be, and of how conspicuous absence was. She felt it before she saw him. Calder Winslow had moved closer, not abruptly, not intrusively. He stopped a careful distance away, close enough to be present, far enough not to presume. He did not speak. He did not yet offer his hand. He simply stood where Philip never did, beside her. The realization struck her with quiet force. Calder Winslow had not claimed her, but he had not left her unguarded either. Eliza did not look at him. She kept her gaze forward, her expression composed, her hands folded neatly before her. The music swelled, the moment hovered. And for the first time that evening, Eliza understood something with absolute clarity. It was not that Philip Hardwick failed to protect her. It was that it had never once occurred to him to try. The music began without ceremony. Eliza recognized the opening bars at once. It was a dance she knew well enough, one she had performed often and well, though never, she realized, with Philip. He disliked being observed too closely while moving. He said it made him look stiff. She told herself it did not matter. Philip had already turned slightly away, drawn into conversation by a gentleman eager to discuss something Eliza doubted would alter either of their lives. His voice was animated, his posture engaged. He did not glance toward the floor. He did not notice the subtle shift in the room as couples began to assemble. Eliza stood as she always did, hands folded neatly before her, posture composed, waiting for the interval to pass. She had done this often enough that it barely registered as disappointment. That was when Calder Winslow crossed the floor. He did not hurry. He did not pause to acknowledge acquaintances or offer polite greetings along the way. He moved with the unremarkable confidence of a man who knew precisely where he was going and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Eliza became aware of him before he reached her. It was impossible not to. The space around her seemed to change, not dramatically, not theatrically, but as though the room itself had adjusted to his approach. He stopped at a proper distance and inclined his head. "Miss Fairrow," he said. Her name, spoken plainly and without embellishment, unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "Your Grace," she replied, equally composed. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The music swelled, the rhythm settling. Around them, couples stepped into place. Eliza could feel the attention of the room sharpening, not pointed, not rude, but aware. Calder extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" There was no flourish to the gesture, no insistence, no performative charm. His tone was calm, as though he had asked something entirely reasonable and expected her to answer according to her own wishes. Eliza hesitated, not because she wished to refuse, but because she was unaccustomed to being asked. Her gaze moved instinctively toward Philip. He was still speaking, one hand lifted as he made a point, his body angled outward. His attention was fully engaged elsewhere. He had not noticed the music begin. He had not noticed her stillness. He had not noticed the man waiting quietly beside her. Calder followed her gaze, then returned his attention to her face. He did not withdraw his hand. "I will not presume," he said quietly. "If you would rather not." Eliza placed her hand in his. The contact was brief at first, nothing improper, nothing beyond what the dance required. And yet the simple steadiness of it startled her. Calder did not flinch. He did not adjust his grip as though uncertain. He did not release her the moment courtesy allowed. He led her onto the floor with unhurried assurance. As they took their places, Eliza became aware, too late to prevent it, that Philip had finally turned. She did not look at him. The music carried them forward. Calder's hand remained where it belonged, firm and guiding, neither possessive nor careless. He matched her pace without effort, as though he had done so all his life. Eliza followed the steps automatically. She had danced this set many times, but never like this. She was not scanning the room for Philip's approval. She was not waiting for instruction. She was not wondering whether she was doing it correctly. She was simply dancing. Around them, the room continued as it always did. Murmured conversation, polite admiration, the quiet evaluation of society at work. Eliza felt it distantly, as though from behind glass. What she felt more clearly was the absence she had grown used to. Philip had never asked her to dance. Not once in 3 years. The realization settled without drama. It did not ache. It clarified. As the set drew to its close, Calder guided her neatly back toward the edge of the floor. He released her hand at once, stepping back without expectation. "Thank you," he said simply. Eliza inclined her head. She did not immediately look for Philip. For the first time in 3 years, Eliza Fairrow was not waiting to be noticed, and that, more than the dance itself, changed everything. The room did not react all at once. It never did. Attention gathered quietly, like breath held too long. Eliza sensed it in the softening of nearby conversations, in the way a few dancers faltered and recovered too carefully. Nothing improper had occurred. Nothing could be challenged. And yet the shift was unmistakable. Calder's hand rested at her back with easy certainty. Neither tentative nor possessive. His hold was correct, his distance respectful, but there was an assurance in it that unsettled her more than any boldness might have done. He did not guide her as though she were uncertain. He moved as though he trusted her to be precisely where she needed to be. She was. The steps came to her without effort. She did not count them. She did not anticipate correction. The music carried them forward, and for the first time in years, Eliza was not conscious of her own movement. She simply danced. Across the room, Philip Hardwick noticed. At first, it was only a pause, a fraction too long between one sentence and the next. He turned, expecting to find some fault with the orchestra or the arrangement of the floor. Instead, he found Eliza. She was turned slightly away from him, her head inclined as Calder spoke to her. Philip could not hear the words, only the calm with which she answered. Something tightened behind his eyes. Eliza moved differently, not dramatically. There was no laughter, no display, but with a looseness he did not recognize. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her hand rested easily in Calder's, unwithdrawn, unguarded. Philip's mouth thinned. He had never liked it when attention drifted away from him. He had never needed to explain why. A gentleman beside him remarked in a low voice that Winslow danced well. Philip did not respond. His focus narrowed, fixed on the space Eliza occupied, and on the man who stood there as though it were his rightful place. Calder Winslow did not look back. That, Eliza sensed dimly, was what sharpened the moment. Calder was not performing. He was not making a point. He was not acknowledging the room at all. His attention remained exactly where it had been from the beginning, on her. The music slowed, then rose again. They turned. The steps carried them nearer the edge of the floor, closer to where Philip now stood, entirely still. Eliza did not look toward him. She was aware of his presence, as one is aware of an approaching storm, but she did not break the line of the dance to acknowledge it. The room felt smaller suddenly, compressed by something unspoken. "You are very calm," Calder said quietly. Eliza glanced at him, surprised. "I don't feel calm." He smiled faintly. "That may be because you are no longer waiting." The words settled, gentle and precise. They reached the end of the set. Calder inclined his head and stepped back, giving her space without withdrawing entirely. Philip was beside her at once. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, the tone he used when displeased. Eliza turned to face him. "Dancing," she said. "You did not ask me. You were occupied." His gaze flicked briefly to Calder, then back to her. That was unnecessary. Eliza studied his face. There was irritation there, possession, embarrassment. There was no concern. "You do not like to dance," she said. "That is beside the point." "No," Eliza replied quietly. "It is the point." Philip frowned. "You are making a spectacle." "I don't believe I am." He glanced around them, aware now of the room's attention. "We will discuss this later." Eliza did not move. Instead, she reached up and removed the ring from her finger. The motion was simple, deliberate, almost unremarkable. Philip stared at the ring in her palm, confusion crossing his features before hardening into disbelief. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," Eliza said evenly, "is no longer necessary." "You cannot mean that." "I asked you a question earlier today," she continued. "You answered honestly. I am returning the honesty." Philip's expression sharpened. "You are being unreasonable." "No," Eliza said. "I am being finished." She placed the ring into his hand and closed his fingers over it. Around them, the room exhaled. Philip said nothing more. There was nothing left for him to say that would matter. Eliza turned away. Calder was already there, not reaching for her, not claiming her, simply positioned so that when she stepped forward, she was not alone. For the first time that evening, for the first time in 3 years. Eliza Fairrow felt no confusion at all, only relief. Eliza left the assembly before the final set concluded, not abruptly, not conspicuously. She waited for a natural pause, for the room to turn its attention elsewhere, and then she moved with quiet certainty toward the antechamber. The night air beyond the doors felt cooler, steadier. She drew a breath and found it reached somewhere it had not before. She had expected triumph. She felt none. What settled over her instead was a strange, disorienting calm, the sort that followed a storm one had been bracing for far too long. The world had not ended. No one had shouted. Nothing had shattered. And yet everything was different. She rested her hand against the back of a chair, surprised to find it trembling. "Miss Fairrow." Calder's voice came from behind her, measured and careful, as though he were announcing himself in a space that belonged to her alone. She turned. He had not followed immediately. She knew that. The restraint mattered more than she could have said. He stood a respectful distance away, his posture unassuming, his attention fixed on her face. Not searching, not expectant. "I hope I have not overstepped," he said. "I wished only to be certain you were well." "I am," Eliza replied. Then after a moment, more honestly, "I think." The words surprised her as they left her mouth. Calder inclined his head, accepting the answer without probing. "May I see you home?" She hesitated. The instinct to refuse rose quickly. Old, familiar, automatic. "I can manage," she said. "I know," he replied at once. "I thought only that you need not." That stopped her. She studied him, searching for insistence, for expectation, for the subtle pressure she had grown accustomed to reading between words. There was none. "Yes," she said finally. "Thank you." The carriage ride was quiet. Not strained, simply quiet. Eliza sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. Only then did she realize how cold they were. She shifted them beneath the shawl, annoyed with herself for noticing. Calder noticed anyway. Without comment, he adjusted the carriage lamp and drew the robe nearer, settling it more securely about her shoulders. The movement was efficient, almost absent-minded, the sort of care that did not ask permission because it assumed none was required. Eliza stiffened. "I'm quite all right," she said quickly. "I know," he replied, just as quickly. Then, gentler. "It is cold." He did not touch her again. He did not linger. He returned his attention to the window as though nothing of note had occurred. Eliza's breath left her in a rush she had not realized she was holding. They had nearly reached her door when the words escaped her. "I'm not accustomed to that." Calder turned. "To what?" She gestured vaguely, embarrassed. "To being tended." The admission hung between them, fragile and unadorned. He considered her for a moment, not with curiosity, but with something quieter. Recognition. "I suspected as much," he said. The carriage slowed. Eliza's pulse quickened, though she could not have said why. "It unsettles me," she continued, surprising herself again, "when someone notices before I ask, when they do not require explanation." Calder's voice remained steady. "You need not explain yourself to me." She laughed softly, without humor. "I've explained myself to men for years. I thought that was what steadiness meant." He did not contradict her. He did not offer comfort in the form of reassurance or argument. "I was not steady as a boy," he said instead. Eliza looked up. "No," he continued, "I was clumsy. I mistook attention for affection and noise for courage. I did not know how to be gentle." The carriage came to a stop. Calder did not move to open the door. He did not rush the moment. "I know I frightened you once," he said quietly. "I would undo that if I could." Her throat tightened. "You did," she admitted. "You made me wary of being noticed at all." He nodded, as though this confirmed something he had long understood. "Then I will be patient now." The words struck her harder than any declaration might have done. Patient, not persuasive, not urgent, not entitled. Patient. Eliza's eyes burned unexpectedly. She looked away, mortified by the suddenness of it. "I don't know how to receive what you are offering," she said, her voice unsteady despite her effort. "I only know how to endure its absence." Calder waited until she looked back at him. "Then we will begin there," he said simply, "with what you know." He opened the carriage door and offered his arm, not as ceremony, not as claim, but as something solid and present. Eliza hesitated only a moment before placing her hand there. The contact was warm, steady, entirely unremarkable. And for reasons she could not have articulated, that was what undid her. As she stepped down into the quiet street, she felt the tears come. Not sharp, not breaking, but slow and unexpected, slipping free of the careful restraint she had worn for so long. Calder did not speak. He remained beside her, matching her pace, his presence neither pressing nor withdrawing. And for the first time since she had returned the ring, Eliza allowed herself to believe that love might not demand endurance after all. Eliza woke with the uneasy sense that she had mislaid something important. Not an object, a certainty. The house was quiet in the way it always was at that hour, the servants moving with practiced discretion, the morning light pale against the windows. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown suited for a short walk, and told herself, quite firmly, that there was no reason to linger indoors. Her head ached faintly. Not enough to mention, enough to notice. At breakfast, her aunt observed her over the rim of a teacup. "You were home early last night." "Yes," Eliza said. "I was finished." Her aunt nodded, as though that answered more than it said. She did not ask questions. She never had. It was one of the quiet kindnesses Eliza had grown to rely upon. Later, when Eliza stepped out into the morning air, she chose the path she always did when she needed to think, the one that skirted the edge of the town green before turning toward the open fields. It was familiar, public enough to be unremarkable, private enough to allow her thoughts their room. She did not expect to see him. Calder Winslow stood near the low stone wall by the square, his coat unbuttoned, his hat tucked beneath his arm. He was not pacing. He was not watching the house. He looked instead like a man who had chosen a place and remained there. When she noticed him, he inclined his head once. "Good morning, Miss Fairrow." "Your Grace?" She slowed despite herself. "I did not realize you were in town." "I'm staying nearby," he replied. "Only for a short while." There was no emphasis in the words, no invitation hidden inside them. They fell into step together without quite deciding to do so. Eliza was aware of the light immediately, the way it pressed against her eyes, sharpened the edges of the day. She said nothing. She had learned long ago that small discomforts were best borne quietly. After a moment, Calder adjusted their path, guiding them beneath the bare branches lining the green. The shade softened the glare. The relief was immediate. Eliza stopped. "I would have managed," she said. "I know," he replied at once. "I thought it unnecessary for you to do so." The simplicity of it unsettled her. They continued more slowly. Eliza pressed her fingers briefly to her temple and then lowered her hand again, irritated with herself for the reflex. Calder noticed. He did not comment on her pallor. He did not ask what troubled her. He merely gestured toward a bench set back from the path. "Shall we sit?" he asked. "There is no need." "There is," he said without insistence, "and it will pass more quickly if you do." She hesitated, then sat. The world steadied almost at once. Calder removed his gloves and placed them beside him, then produced a neatly folded handkerchief. He offered it without ceremony. "It may help," he said. Eliza stared at it. "I did not ask." "No," he agreed. The word caught somewhere behind her ribs. "I am not accustomed," she said slowly, choosing each word with care, "to someone noticing before I explain myself." Calder's gaze remained steady. "I suspected that." She laughed softly, without humor. "I learned that explanation was required. If I made myself clear enough, agreeable enough, things remained smooth." "And were they?" he asked. She looked away. They were quiet. The admission surprised her. She had not intended to say it aloud. Calder did not press. He did not correct her. He simply waited. "I do not wish to become dependent," she said at last. "I will not exchange one form of safety for another." He rose then, stepping back from the bench, giving her space she had not asked for but suddenly needed. "You will not," he said, "because I will not ask you to." She looked up, startled. "I'm not offering you protection in place of your own," he continued. "I'm offering you company. You may accept it or not." The distinction settled slowly, like something she had been missing the words for. Her head still ached. The morning was still bright. The world had not softened to accommodate her feelings, and yet something inside her eased. "Then you must allow me time," she said. "I already have," he replied. She took the handkerchief at last, pressing it to her temple. The coolness was immediate, grounding. When she stood to return it, Calder waved the gesture away. "Keep it." "For how long?" "For as long as you need it." They resumed their walk. Eliza did not hurry to match his stride. He slowed to match hers. She noticed that before she noticed anything else, and as they reached the bend in the path where their ways would naturally part, Calder inclined his head once more. "I will not presume upon your mourning," he said. "Good day, Miss Fairrow." He left her then. Eliza stood for a moment longer, the linen folded in her hand, the quiet space beside her unmistakable. She had not asked for any of it. And yet, for the first time, the absence he left behind felt like something she might one day miss. Calder did not appear the following morning, nor the one after that. Eliza noticed the absence sooner than she expected, and then told herself, with some firmness, that there was nothing in it to notice. He had said he would not presume. He had meant it. Respect, she reminded herself, often took the shape of restraint. Still, the mornings felt unfinished. She kept to her habits. She rose early. She took her walks at the usual hour, choosing the familiar paths that skirted the town green before turning toward open fields. She greeted acquaintances, paused where it pleased her, returned home when she chose. Nothing in her routine had altered, and yet something had shifted. On the third morning, she reached the bend beneath the bare trees and slowed without intending to. He was not there. Eliza told herself she had not expected him, that she had merely been distracted, and continued on. The thought followed her all the same, quiet and insistent, like a question she had not yet learned how to ask. At a small gathering that afternoon, tea with neighbors who had heard in vague terms that her engagement had ended, Eliza answered polite inquiries with composed brevity. She offered no detail. She did not defend herself. The conversation moved on, as such conversations always did. There would be time to speak of it later once the decision had settled beyond alteration. What unsettled her was not the restraint, but the ease with which she found herself finishing a thought without interruption. No one corrected her phrasing. No one redirected the conversation. No gentle pressure arrived, disguised as concern. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, she felt oddly unmoored. That evening, her aunt observed her over the rim of a teacup. "You seem quieter than usual." Eliza considered this. "I've been thinking," she said at last. Her aunt accepted the answer without question. 2 days later, Eliza declined an invitation she would once have attended without hesitation. The noise felt unnecessary, the effort excessive. The relief that followed surprised her more than the decision itself. She took her walk later than usual, the light already softening, the air cool enough to require a shawl. Halfway along the path, she realized her hands were cold. She stopped, flexing her fingers, absurdly aware of the empty space beside her. No one noticed. The thought struck her with unexpected force. She did not miss Duke of Winslow's presence in the way one missed novelty or excitement. She missed something quieter, the way her pace had slowed without effort, the way she had not needed to account for herself. Without realizing it, she had grown accustomed to being met. The realization unsettled her. That night, she took out the handkerchief he had given her. It had been laundered now, neatly folded, the linen softened by use. She turned it once between her fingers and placed it carefully in her drawer. She did not tell herself it meant anything. The week passed without incident. Calder did not write. He did not send word through acquaintances. He kept the distance he had promised so thoroughly that Eliza began to wonder whether she had imagined the closeness of their earlier exchanges. On the 7th day, she encountered him by chance. They reached for the same volume at the bookseller's, their hands nearly touching before Calder withdrew his at once. "My pardon," he said. Then with a pause, "Miss Fairrow." "Your Grace." She inclined her head, her pulse inexplicably quickening. "I hope you are well," he said. "I am," she replied, and was surprised to find it true. They stood there, the space between them carefully maintained. Calder did not ask after her health. He did not remark upon the days that had passed. He did not look as though he expected anything of her at all. And yet he did not leave. "I return to my estate tomorrow," he said, as though mentioning nothing more consequential than the weather. "I wish to say farewell." The words landed more heavily than she had expected. "For long?" she asked, then immediately wished she had not. He regarded her with that steady attention she was coming to recognize. "That depends." She waited. "I did not wish to assume you would care to continue our acquaintance," he said. "After everything." The honesty of it left her momentarily without words. "I am not accustomed," Eliza said slowly, "to being allowed to decide without consequence." Calder's mouth curved just slightly. "There are always consequences. They need not be penalties." The bookseller cleared his throat pointedly. Eliza stepped back, embarrassed, and Calder did the same. As he turned to leave, Eliza found herself speaking before she had fully resolved to do so. "Will you write?" she asked. Calder stopped. "If you wish it," he said. She held his gaze, her thoughts finally steady. "I do." He nodded once. "Then I shall." He did not linger. He did not press. He left. Eliza remained where she was, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing more loudly than it ought to have done. She did not feel abandoned. She felt, for the first time, that something had been placed carefully in her hands, and she had chosen not to let it go. Calder did not write immediately, not because he had forgotten, but because he was careful. Eliza noticed the difference at once. Philip had always written in bursts, pages thick with reassurance whenever he sensed her drifting. Silence when he felt secure again. Calder's restraint felt deliberate by comparison, as though he were weighing not what he wished to say, but what she was prepared to receive. When his letter arrived at last, it was brief. He wrote of the weather in Surrey, of an estate matter that required his attention, of a book he had finished and did not recommend. Only at the end did he add a single line, written plainly, without ornament. "If you care to walk, I will be in the lower meadow on Thursday." No expectation followed, no request. Eliza read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it beside her mirror. She did not answer at once. She allowed a full day to pass, testing the steadiness of her decision. On Wednesday evening, she wrote back. Thursday will suit. The meadow lay beyond the town, where the land dipped gently before rising again toward a line of bare oaks. Eliza arrived precisely on time. Calder was already there, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, his attention fixed not on the path, but on the distant fields. He turned at her approach and inclined his head. "Miss Fairrow." "Your Grace." They walked without speaking at first, the ground soft beneath their feet, the air cool but not sharp. Eliza was aware of her own breathing, of the space between them, of the quiet that did not demand filling. She stopped near the edge of the meadow. "There is something I have never said to you," she began. Calder halted at once. "Then I will listen." She faced him fully now, the memory she had kept carefully contained pressing forward at last. "When we were young," she said, "you frightened me." He did not flinch. "You pulled my hair, you mocked me, you cut it once and laughed when I cried." Her voice remained steady, though her hands had curled tightly in her gloves. "I learned, very early, that being noticed by you meant discomfort." Calder inclined his head, not in defense, but in acknowledgement. "I know. You were careless," she continued, "and loud and unashamed. Everything the world excused in you, it punished in others." She hesitated, then said quietly, "You made me wary of attention itself." The silence that followed was not strained. "I have carried that," she added, "longer than I ought to have done." Calder drew a slow breath. "May I tell you a story?" he asked. Eliza nodded. "Once," he said, "there was a boy who did not know how to be gentle." She felt something tighten in her chest. He admired a girl who was quieter than he was, cleverer, more contained. He noticed her long before he understood what that noticing meant. Calder's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. He wished for her attention and had no notion how to earn it. Eliza did not interrupt. "So he chose the only language he knew," Calder continued. "Noise, mischief, interruption. He believed that if he could make her look at him, even in anger, it was better than not being seen at all." Her throat burned unexpectedly. "He did not understand," he said, his voice even, "that affection delivered without care becomes cruelty, regardless of intent." Calder turned to her then. "He grew older. He learned restraint. He learned consequence." A pause. But by then, the damage had been done. Eliza's eyes blurred. She looked away quickly, mortified by the suddenness of it. "You owe me no explanation," she said. "I know," Calder replied. "I offer it anyway." He did not step closer. He did not reach for her hand. "I loved you long before I knew how to love at all," he said simply. "And I would have remained silent if silence were kinder." She drew a careful breath. "When Philip asked me to marry him," she said, "I believed safety was the same as affection. He never frightened me." A pause. He never noticed me either. Calder said nothing. "I chose him because he was the opposite of you," she continued, "and I stayed because quiet felt like peace." She met Calder's gaze at last. It was not. The admission settled between them, heavy and freeing all at once. "I'm afraid," Eliza said quietly, "that I do not know how to receive what you offer, only how to endure its absence." Calder considered her, then inclined his head. "Then we will proceed slowly," he said, "without performance, without assumption." A pause. "You need never fear being noticed by me again." The words undid her more thoroughly than any declaration could have done. They stood there as the light shifted across the meadow, neither of them in a hurry to leave. For the first time, Eliza understood something she had never allowed herself to name. That the boy who had once pulled her hair had grown into a man who waited, and that perhaps, if she dared, she might learn to trust the difference. It was not a single moment, but an accumulation. The way she no longer rehearsed her words before speaking, the way she forgot to brace herself when footsteps sounded behind her, the way her body seemed to settle in Calder's presence without conscious permission. That, more than anything, unsettled her. They were walking the longer path beyond the town, the one that curved gently toward the open fields. Calder spoke of an estate matter he found faintly ridiculous, and Eliza smiled. An unguarded, immediate thing she did not think to restrain. She caught herself at once. The smile faded. Calder noticed. He did not comment. He simply slowed, matching the change in her pace. "You need not walk farther," he said. "We may turn back." "I'm not tired," she replied too quickly. He inclined his head, accepting the answer without challenge. They continued on, but the ease had broken. Eliza felt it keenly, the way she always felt the moment she had revealed too much of herself. A familiar instinct stirred, sharp and insistent. "Pull back." The thought came unbidden, as reflexive as breath. It had kept her safe for years. When they reached the rise overlooking the fields, Calder paused. Eliza stopped with him, folding her hands neatly before her, reassembling the composure that had once felt like armor. "You have been very kind," she said suddenly. Calder turned to her fully. "I hope so. That is not what I mean." She drew a careful breath. "You have been attentive, consistent." "Yes," he said simply. The steadiness of the answer unnerved her. She pressed on. "I'm concerned that you may be mistaken in your generosity." His brow furrowed slightly. "In what way?" She hesitated, then forced the words out before she could reconsider. "I'm becoming accustomed to it." The air seemed to still around them. Calder did not respond at once. He did not smile. He did not reassure her away from the thought. "Accustomed?" he repeated. "Yes." Her voice tightened despite her effort. "And that is dangerous." "For you?" he asked quietly. "For me," she said at once. "I have learned, at some cost, that comfort can disguise expectation, that attention, once accepted, becomes obligation." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze squarely. "I will not find myself shaped again by another's regard." The words rang with more force than she had intended. Calder studied her for a long moment. Eliza felt the old fear rise. The anticipation of correction, of persuasion, of disappointment. Instead, he stepped back. Not abruptly, not in offense, just far enough to change the shape of the space between them. "Then you are right to say so," he said. The simplicity of it wrong-footed her. "You do not wish me to continue as I have," he went on, "so I shall not." Eliza blinked. Just like that?" "Yes." No argument followed. No wounded pride. No quiet withdrawal meant to teach her regret. "You have not asked me to stop," he added. "You have only told me what frightens you. I will not answer fear with insistence." The ground shifted under her feet. Not dangerously, but decisively. "That is unusual," she said. "I know." They stood there, the fields stretching wide before them, the wind lifting the edge of her shawl. Eliza realized, with a faint shock, that she had expected him to resist her boundary. That expectation alone told her how deeply habit ran. "I do not mean to be ungrateful," she said, more softly now. "I am not asking you to be grateful," Calder replied. "Only honest." She swallowed. "Then I must be honest," she said. "I'm afraid that if I let myself grow used to this, to you, I will not know how to stand without it." Calder considered her, then nodded once. "Then I will not be the thing you lean upon," he said. "I will walk beside you. Or not at all." The choice, placed so plainly before her, stole her breath. He turned then, not away from her, but toward the path back to town. "We should return," he said. "You look chilled." Only then did she notice the cold creeping into her hands. He did not offer his arm. He did not adjust her shawl. He did not reach for her at all. And somehow that restraint, chosen, not withdrawn, struck her more deeply than any tenderness had done. They walked back in quiet. When they reached the place where their paths parted, Calder inclined his head. "I will give you space," he said. "Not as punishment, as respect." She watched him go, her thoughts in disarray, her chest tight with something she could not yet name. It was only later, standing alone in her room, that the truth arrived with unexpected clarity. She had stepped back to protect herself, and he had let her, not because he cared less, but because he cared enough to allow her to remain whole. The realization unsettled her far more than closeness ever had. And for the first time since they had begun this careful dance, Eliza wondered not whether she could trust him, but whether she could trust herself not to run from what felt like love. Calder kept his word. He did not call the next day, nor the one after that. Eliza told herself this was what she had asked for. Space freely given without resentment or display. She had meant it as a boundary, not a test, and yet the quiet that followed felt sharper than the quiet she had known before. This one had been chosen. The difference mattered. She went about her days with careful attention, determined not to read meaning where none had been offered. She wrote letters she did not send. She walked farther than usual and returned earlier than she wished. Each decision felt deliberate, as though she were proving something to herself she could not quite name. At a small dinner hosted by acquaintances of her aunt, Eliza found herself seated beside a gentleman who spoke at length about his own opinions. She listened politely, nodded where expected, and felt an old, familiar fatigue settle over her. Across the table, someone remarked upon Calder's absence. "He has returned to his estate, I believe," another replied. "The Duke has matters there that require his presence. Tenants, land, obligations that cannot be delayed. A pity. He lent a certain gravity to the room." Eliza kept her gaze on her plate. No one asked her opinion. The realization struck her unexpectedly. Not as relief, but as loss. She had grown used, in a matter of weeks, to being addressed directly, to being listened to without interruption, to having her words taken as sufficient in themselves. She excused herself earlier than planned and walked home alone. The evening air was cool, the sky already darkening. As she passed the familiar turn in the road, she slowed, half expecting to see a familiar figure waiting there out of habit rather than hope. He was not. For the first time since she had asked for space, Eliza felt something dangerously close to regret. She had not meant to push him away. She had meant to steady herself. The distinction felt important, and suddenly fragile. 2 days later, a note arrived. It was brief, characteristically so. "I will be in town tomorrow on business. If you wish to walk, I should be glad of the company. If not, I shall understand." Eliza read the note twice, then a third time. She did not wait a full day to answer. "Tomorrow will suit," she wrote, her hand steadier than she felt. They met at the edge of the green, the place that had become quietly theirs. Calder greeted her with the same composed courtesy he had always shown, no hint of distance or reproach in his manner. They walked for several moments in silence. "I was afraid," Eliza said at last. Calder slowed, but did not stop. "Of what?" "Of losing myself," she replied. "And in doing so, I very nearly lost something else instead." He considered this. "You did not lose me." "No," she said. "But I might have." They reached the low stone wall overlooking the fields. Eliza rested her hands upon it, drawing a careful breath. "I have learned how to leave," she continued quietly. "How to withdraw before I am diminished. It has served me well." A pause. "But it is not the same as knowing how to stay." Calder turned to her then, his expression intent but calm. "I will not ask you to remain where you are, uncertain," he said. "But I will tell you this. I do not mistake your caution for rejection." The words loosened something in her chest she had not realized was held tight. "I do not wish to be endured," he added. "Nor do I wish to be fled." She met his gaze fully now. "What do you wish?" she asked. "To be chosen," he replied. "When you are ready." The simplicity of it left her momentarily without speech. "I'm not ready," she said honestly. "I know." They stood there, the late afternoon light stretching long across the fields. Eliza became aware then of how easily the moment might have gone differently, how close she had come to turning away out of habit rather than truth. "I'm afraid," she said, more quietly now, "that I do not yet trust myself to recognize happiness when it appears." Calder nodded once. "Then I will remain where you may find me." He did not reach for her hand. He did not step closer. And yet, when the wind rose suddenly, he moved without thought, positioning himself between her and the chill, his presence a quiet shield rather than a claim. Eliza noticed. She always did now. As they turned back toward the town together, she felt a new resolve take shape. Not sudden, not dramatic, but firm. She had asked for space. She had been given it. And in that space, she had learned something she could no longer ignore. That love, offered without condition, could be stepped away from, but only at the cost of recognizing what one truly wished to return to. This time, she did not intend to walk away again. Calder did not announce his departure. Eliza learned of it the way such things were often learned, indirectly and too late to pretend indifference. Her aunt mentioned it over breakfast, remarking that the Duke of Winslow would be returning north for some months to settle matters long neglected. Estate obligations, parliamentary pressures, the sort of duties that did not invite delay. "He is very conscientious," her aunt observed, "a man who does not linger where he is not required." Eliza's hand stilled around her teacup. "How long?" she asked. Her aunt glanced up, surprised by the question. "The season, perhaps longer. It is not uncommon." No, it was not. Men left. Lives continued. Women adjusted. Eliza nodded and said nothing more. The day passed quietly. Too quietly. She walked the familiar paths, noting absences she had once dismissed without thought. The lower meadow lay empty. The bookseller greeted her kindly but without expectation. Even the air felt unchanged, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. Nothing had been taken from her, nothing had been demanded, and yet something essential was slipping beyond reach. That evening, her aunt set aside her sewing and regarded Eliza with gentle scrutiny. "You have been very composed these past weeks," she said. "I hope that does not mean you are merely enduring again." Eliza looked up sharply. "I am not enduring," she said. Her aunt smiled faintly. "Then what are you doing, my dear?" The question followed Eliza long after she retired for the night. She sat at her dressing table, the candle burning low, her reflection steady but unfamiliar. She had lived her life in careful adjustment, stepping aside, waiting, allowing decisions to be made around her rather than through her. She had mistaken stillness for safety. Calder had never asked her to be still. He had asked her to choose. The realization settled slowly, but with undeniable weight. By morning, the house was quiet. Her aunt had gone out early. Eliza stood in the entryway, gloved and resolute, her pulse steady in a way it had not been for years. She knew where Calder would be. Not the meadow, not the town. Home. Part 13. What she chose to keep. Calder's house was not grand. It was well kept, orderly, lived in. A place shaped by use rather than display. Eliza noted this at once. The absence of unnecessary ornament, the sense that every room served a purpose beyond being admired. She was shown into a small sitting room overlooking the garden. Calder entered moments later, clearly startled to find her there. "Miss Fairrow," he said, then stopped himself. "Eliza, I hope I am not intruding," she said. "You are not," he replied at once. "You are welcome." He waited. Always, he waited. "I heard you were leaving," she said. "Yes, for some time." "Yes." The simplicity of his answers steadied her. "I have spent much of my life believing that quiet meant safety," Eliza continued, "that if I asked little and accepted much, I would not be disappointed." Calder said nothing. "I was wrong," she said. "Quiet can also mean absence, and I have endured absence long enough." She met his gaze fully now, her voice firm. "I do not wish to endure love," she said. "I wish to live within it." Calder drew a slow breath. "Then you must be certain," he said gently. "Not of me, but of yourself." "I am," she replied. She reached into her reticule and withdrew the handkerchief he had once given her, folded neatly. "I have learned how to step back," she said. "Now I'm choosing to step forward." He did not move. He did not reach for her. He did not speak, until she closed the space between them herself. Calder lifted his hand, then, not to claim her, but to steady her, his touch light and unmistakably reverent. "I will walk with you," he said quietly. "At your pace, for as long as you wish." Eliza nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "That is all I ask." They stood there together, the house hushed around them, no audience to witness the moment, no expectation beyond the truth of it. Later, much later, they walked into the garden side by side. Calder adjusted his stride without thought, matching hers as he always had. When she slipped her hand into his, he did not startle. He simply held it. There was no declaration, no promise spoken aloud. Only the quiet certainty of two lives, finally aligned. And for the first time, Eliza Fairrow did not fear the stillness, because this time she had chosen it. Calder's estate bore the unmistakable weight of a ducal seat, not ostentatious, but vast, ordered, and assured. Stone that had stood for generations, land held in careful discipline, a household that moved with quiet efficiency, authority present without announcement. Eliza felt it at once, not in decoration, but in scale, in permanence, in the certainty that nothing here existed by accident. She was shown through a broad corridor and into a private sitting room, one clearly used rather than displayed, its tall windows opening onto the gardens beyond. The room was proportioned generously, furnished for comfort, not exhibition. A space chosen for retreat, not reception. Calder entered moments later, clearly startled to find her there. "Miss Fairrow," he said, then stopped himself. "Eliza, I hope I am not intruding," she said. "You are not," he replied at once. "You are welcome." He waited. Always, he waited. "I heard you were leaving," she said. "Yes, for some time." "Yes." The simplicity of his answers steadied her. "I have spent much of my life believing that quiet meant safety," Eliza continued. "That if I asked little and accepted much, I would not be disappointed." Calder said nothing. "I was wrong," she said. "Quiet can also mean absence, and I have endured absence long enough." She met his gaze fully now, her voice firm. "I do not wish to endure love," she said. "I wish to live within it." Calder drew a slow breath. "Then you must be certain," he said gently. "Not of me, but of yourself." "I am," she replied. She reached into her reticule and withdrew the handkerchief he had once given her, folded neatly. "I have learned how to step back," she said. "Now I'm choosing to step forward." He did not move. He did not reach for her. He did not speak, until she closed the space between them herself. Calder lifted his hand, then, not to claim her, but to steady her, his touch light and unmistakably reverent. "I will walk with you," he said quietly, "at your pace, for as long as you wish." Eliza nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "That is all I ask." They stood there together, the great house hushed around them, no audience to witness the moment, no expectation beyond the truth of it. Later, much later, they walked into the garden side by side. Calder adjusted his stride without thought, matching hers as he always had. When she slipped her hand into his, he did not startle. He simply held it. There was no declaration, no promise spoken aloud, only the quiet certainty of two lives, finally aligned. And for the first time, Eliza Fairrow did not fear the stillness, because this time she had chosen it.
I learned the shape of your silence before I learned my own. I mistook calm for kindness and patience for a home.
I waited in the pauses he never tried to fill. I called it understanding, you called it standing still.
I never meant to hurt you, I never raised my hand. I thought love was steady ground, not something you demand.
I gave you space and order, a life that wouldn't break. I didn't know your quiet was everything you gave. I looked for myself in your eyes, but they only showed what you liked. I kept standing closer, growing dimmer. You were the black mirror. I asked you who I was becoming. You watched but said nothing. I faded thinner, quieter in the black mirror. They said I was lucky to have you, so calm, so composed. But love shouldn't feel like vanishing
in someone else's control.
I counted every careful word so I wouldn't cross a line.
You never asked who I was, only who I could be this time.
You changed so slowly, I thought you were the same.
I thought your silence meant content, not something slipping away.
I love the way you fit beside me, never made a scene. I didn't hear the cost of that, or what it did to you, to me. I look for myself in your eyes, but they only showed what you liked. I kept standing closer, growing dimmer. You were the black mirror. I asked you who I was becoming. You watched but said nothing. I faded thinner, quieter in the black mirror. Love shouldn't feel like guessing or waiting to be seen. I bent myself into reflections until I couldn't find the me. I don't blame you for the silence, but I name it now as true. never knew you broke.
You just never showed me
what I couldn't see.
that love needs reflection, not control disguised as peace.
I looked for myself in your eyes, but they only showed what you liked. I kept standing closer, growing dimmer.
You were the black mirror.
I asked you who I was becoming. You watched but said nothing. I faded thinner, quieter in the black mirror.
Myself in your eyes, but they only showed what you liked. I kept standing closer, growing dimmer. You were the black mirror. I asked you who I was becoming. You watched but said nothing. I faded thinner, quieter in the black mirror.